I'll never forget the first time I played the original Resident Evil on PlayStation 1. My friend at school had told me they rented it for the weekend and thought it was amazing, and the way he described it, it just made me desperate to play it. So that very weekend I bypassed getting it as a rental and picked up the game from my local game store, where the owner too told me it was one of the best games he had ever played. So I got home, dropped in the disc, probably turned my console upside down and began to play. A few hours later, the game was back on the shelf of the very same game store as I traded it in for something else. To be frank, I found the first Resident Evil slow, and as I love games with fast, intense action most of the time, I just found the slower progression of Resident Evil to be a little too slow for my liking. Sometime later I picked up a PlayStation with 300 or so copy games, and lo and behold, Resident Evil and other clones such as Parasite Eve were all in the bundle. No matter which clone I played, or no matter how much effort I made, I just couldn't get into the game in any way, shape or form. A few years later, the hype machine was going crazy for the release of Resident Evil 2. I just couldn't get into the hype of it, and so I really couldn't care less that it wasn't coming to the N64. Also, deep down I just knew that there was no way in hell that a CD-based game of that size could be rammed onto a cartridge, and if they had did, it'd be some kind of half-baked port with huge elements cut out due to the constraints. While flicking through a copy of N64 magazine from the time, I stumbled across some news that Resident Evil 2 was coming to the N64, and the developers wouldn't be pushing out a cut down version, they were instead trying to put the entire game, including the video cutscenes, into a cart. If it had been in the official Nintendo magazine, I would quite possibly have pissed my sides laughing at how stupid it sounds. But this was N64 magazine, which usually didn't speculate without good authority. Months and months went by and the story never altered. Resident Evil 2 was coming in all its glory, and at the end of 1999 it was to be released on the biggest capacity cartridge on the console. So its launch day arrived, I went to the game store and picked up a totally different game. What? I already told you I wasn't a fan of the series. Until just a few weeks ago, I'd never really given Resident Evil 2 a fair crack, based on my poor experiences with the original batch of survival horror games. However, on my never-ending quest to review everything N64 related, it led me to review this, and what better time than this month of horror titles. Right off the bat, I'll admit that I've been an absolute douche. This game is perhaps now one of my all-time favourite titles on the console, and I'd go as far as to say that it's being one of the console's biggest technical achievements in the history of the system. The game is set 2 months after the series of Resident Evil 1, and nearly all citizens have been transformed into zombies by the T-virus. You choose to play as either rookie cop Leon or college student Claire, who each have their own personal storylines that intertwined with each other at different points in the game. This also alters how the game is played out, as each have their own areas of the city to drive their story forward. Setting the N64 port aside from other versions is the ability to change not just the level of violence and blood colour, but a randomizer to place items in different places each time you play. Avoiding spoilers as much as possible, let's just say that the storyline is gripping, and it has enough depth to give you that sensation of wanting to play on for just a few more minutes every time you play. It naturally does have those jumpy moments that you expect with most horror games to give you the quick adrenaline rush, but the game as a whole has a great atmosphere, and you're constantly on the edge from being overwhelmed and killed by the numerous zombies. Speaking of those, they are well designed and have enough variation to ensure that the game moves quickly along, without being bogged down by endless scenes where you shoot slowly moving hordes. To port this game to the N64, $1 million was set aside, as well as 20 employees from Capcom Production Studio 3, Angel Studios and Factor 5. They were given 12 months to get the game ready to be released, and what came out at the other end is perhaps the definitive version of Resident Evil 2. This version also has the added EX files, which you can find to fill in the blanks from the other games in the series if you are new to the franchise. They do their best to link the storyline of Resident Evil 1, Nemesis and Code Veronica to help further engross you into the bigger picture whilst playing this game. Sure, the game doesn't have the DualShock version features that the enhanced version of the game had, but the resolution when played with the expansion pack is far superior to the PlayStation original. Also, the animations were improved to make them smoother, and the 3D models were bumped up a little too. As you know, I'm always really into the sound design and composition of games, and this is perhaps one of the best examples of excellent sound design, not just on the N64 but from any game of the era. This port supports Dolby Surround, which was built from the ground up especially for this version. The team worked the sound from the ground up to give each instrument a higher sample rate than the PlayStation version. The biggest surprise to many people is that you usually expect the CD version of the game to sound better, but in this case it really does come down to opinion. Whilst the sound is of a higher sample rate, the compression is extensive, and sometimes the game can sound quite tinny, and this is further emphasised if you play in full surround on a good set of speakers or a soundbar. The controls, however, have always been divisive for gamers. The tank controls that the game is based around are yet again in this version, and whilst at first they can seem a little alien, they quickly become second nature, and you'll be able to move quickly and freely throughout the game. Angel Studios, however, also added what they call a first person mode. Essentially, this allows your character to move in the direction that you move the analog stick, regardless of which way they are facing. Personally, I found this hard to get to grips with given the game's quick camera and angle changes, but for those who just can't get to grips with the tank controls, it is a great second option which may open up the game to people who were turned off by the standard controls the series is known for. The entire game really is the port that should never have been. The crippling limitations of N64 cartridge based games should have ruled out games like this ever coming onto the system. That was one of the biggest reasons why many developers jumped ship to create games for the PlayStation in the first place, and yet Capcom proved that with some time and effort, and some heavy compression, games of this size and magnitude could come to the N64. But as always, it's all about our memories as gamers, and so I want to hear your thoughts on Resident Evil series. Which is your favourite game in the franchise, and why do you think many people still consider this to be the best Resident Evil game ever made? As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and until next time.